Hello, and welcome to Session 4 in our Cybersecurity and Industrial Systems Roundtable series, sponsored by Rockwell Automation. My name is Katie, and I will be your Global Spec moderator, and I would like to review a few housekeeping items with you before we begin. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the operation of the user interface for today's webinar. The large window with the heading Presentation in the upper left is the primary window for today's webinar. Just to the right of the main presentation window is the speaker bio window with background information on today's presenters. Just below that is the Q&A window. At any time during the presentation, you can enter a question into the box in the lower section of the window and click Submit. Your question will be placed in the queue to address when we get to the Q&A session. At the bottom of your screen, you will see additional buttons to enhance your webinar experience. To see what a particular button does, just place your mouse pointer over it and a tooltip will appear with the description of the button's function. Now I would like to introduce our moderator for the Cybersecurity for Industrial Systems Roundtable series, Edgar Sauter. Edgar is the Senior Director of New Product Technology at CSA Group. Edgar and his team look at the technology horizon for new developments and applications that could present opportunity for CSA's test, inspection, and certification business. To read more about Edgar or any of our presenters today, please look at the speaker bio window right next to the main presentation window. And with that, I'd like to pass things along to Edgar to lead us through today's discussion on Zero Trust Strategy, creating a secure system. Edgar, welcome to today's event. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Katie, for the introduction. I am Edgar Sauter, Senior Director of New Product Technology at CSA Group, and I will be the moderator of this roundtable. We are so pleased that you could join us today as we have a conversation about how Zero Trust approach is used for cybersecurity of industrial systems. With us today, we have Daniel Jablansky. Daniel is a non-resident fellow at the Cyber Statecraft Initiative of the Atlantic Council Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, and an OT cybersecurity strategist at Nozomi Networks. Danielle has also served as the president of the North Texas section of the International Society of Automation. She holds a master's degree in international security from the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies at the University of Denver, and a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Missouri, Columbia. We also with us have Randy Armstrong. Randy is lead security architect at the OPC Foundation. Randy has 25 years experience working on OPC standards and developing communication software for industrial automation. He is one of the main architects behind the Zero Trust security model that is incorporated into OPC UA. He has also designed and developed software used to centrally manage the security configuration of IA devices. We also have Tony Baker. Tony is a Vice President and Chief Product Security Officer for Rockwell Automation. Tony brings more than 15 years of experience in automation and industrial security. Throughout his career, Tony has worked with industrial controls and the application of cybersecurity concepts, practices, and technologies. Tony has a bachelor in electrical and computer engineering from the Ohio State University. We also have with us Roman Aruchinov. Roman is the co-founder and VP of products for Sage Inc. He has more than 20 years of experience in cybersecurity, networking, and industrial applications. Most recently, he led product management and R&D globally at ABB Industrial Communications, establishing market leadership in utility, energy, transportation, and DoD federal markets. Roman holds a bachelor in applied mathematics from the University of California, Berkeley, and an MBA from Columbia University. We also have Mike Hoffman. Mike has over 20 years of experience focused on oil and gas networks with roles in downstream, upstream, and global technical leadership. His past titles have included Principal ICS Security Engineers, Control and Automation Specialist, process CEMS analyzer specialist, and an instrumentation and electrical technician. He has a master's degree in information security engineering from Science Technology Institute and is a science instructor in development for the ICS curriculum. Well, Daniel, Randy, Tony, Roman, and Mike, thank you very much for joining us today and share your knowledge and experience with our audience. So as manufacturers, utilities, and other essential services start to use more interconnected sensors, controllers, and other devices, their exposure to cyber threats increases. There are several ways to mitigate this risk, but these organizations have to make timely decisions when it comes to security training and risk-based decision-making. Zero trust approach is one of these ways that these organizations can mitigate this risk. Zero trust approach make it a little bit difficult for unauthorized users to access those assets within an industrial systems. So today with us, this set of experts is going to help us understand how zero trust can be implemented in an organization and how it protects sensitive data and assets. But before we begin, let's have some acknowledgement for our sponsors today. So Rockwell Automation is a global leader in industrial automation and digital transformation solutions. Rockwell domain expertise in operation technology and industrial environment afford them the opportunity to advise companies on their OT cybersecurity strategy and be a supplier of industrial automation cybersecurity services and solutions. For more information, visit rockwellautomation.com. This webinar is hosted by Global Spec, the world's largest online industrial destination for product sourcing and engineering information. So without further delay, let's start with our panel for today. And just for the benefit of the people that are new to the cybersecurity area, let's start by defining what zero trust means. And Tony, could you please help us with that? What is zero trust?
Thank you, Edgar. Zero trust is really a strategy that we've seen become more and more popular over the last 5 or so years that highlights an approach that we can take to securing a number of systems, not just within the OT space, but we think about remote access, we think about IT infrastructure. Zero trust is a strategy that can be applied in many different areas. It's really gained a lot of traction in the last year or so when it's been acknowledged by the recent White House executive order, publications by NIST and others that really have embraced that concept. So if we take a step back, what does that mean? Again, it's a strategy. It's not a product. It's not go buy this product and all of a sudden you have zero trust. It's thinking about how the behavior of your systems work. And so a lot of times people think about zero trust as making everything trusted within your environment, but it's actually the inverse. It's removing trust from your system. And when you remove that trust, how does your system behave? It means you're constantly asking, is it really Roman who I'm talking to over there, right? And you're constantly validating and verifying and adapting your strategy to ensure that the systems that you're working with, the interconnectivity, maintains that overall zero trust strategy. Again, it's not just identity, it's not just products. We have to take a step back and think about what's the overall business outcome. And when we think about it from a business outcome perspective, it allows us to begin our journey. And I think that's an important thing for people to understand is that you're not going to get there overnight. Not every device out there supports the ability to do these challenges and responses. And so start big, work from the outside in, and I think you'll find that there's a lot of value that you can achieve today, leveraging this type of concept moving into the future. So with that, I'd like to open up and hear some of the thoughts of other people on the panel, because zero trust is a very, we'll call it dynamic space with lots of people trying to work to address it with a lot of different approaches. So anybody else how do you view zero trust in your space?
Yeah, Tony, I agree with you on that it's a concept and a strategy, and you described it well in fact that it's the opposite of implicit trust. Current systems we find today are utilizing this principle of implicit trust. It's given the fact that you're part of the same network, that's isolated, or a certain user, a certain machine, it's trusted. It's allowed to interact with others, and that's actually creating a number of challenges today for security as our world becomes more interconnected, as our customers are interacting more and more with their suppliers. They have business intelligence systems in the enterprise and cloud. They have various servicers coming on site. This implicit trust concept is actually creating security challenges. Um, uh, and Zero Trust aims to address those security challenges. One common misconception is that Zero Trust requires this whole how do I start? Re-architecture or redesign, throw everything out, let's start fresh. In fact, it's it's the opposite. Zero Trust can be layered on and transitioned to one step at a time, utilizing current equipment, current assets, and current workflows can be transitioned to a Zero Trust model.
One thing for me, when I look at it, is with the Zero Trust model, it is at the high level this abstract concept and an abstract strategy. But if you're going to translate it into something practical in the factory, you have to start thinking about what are you doing on a node by node basis, and what infrastructure do you have in place to support that. And if you don't have this fundamental infrastructure in place, you can't implement Zero Trust. And it's how do you migrate from where you are now to the challenge with implementing Zero Trust is how do you migrate where you are now to a network where you can have Zero Trust, because a lot of times that's going to require upgrades, a lot of software upgrades or even hardware upgrades to different elements of your network.
Now, all this sounds really interesting, but in an OT network, like all those check-in and validations, it sounds complicated. Like, I mean, you have to change equipments, replace sensors here and there, and you also have to be concerned about the data and bandwidth. So to me, it sounds like it creates more issues that will actually solve. So how this efficiency in the network is addressed in Zero Trust?
I would actually challenge us to think that there are ways to adopt Zero Trust today that do not require you to make network changes or asset changes. Technologies do exist that can essentially overlay Zero Trust on top of existing Purdue model architectures. Of course, adding additional software into the operation, but not changing any of the assets, not having any agents or clients, or in fact, re-architecting your networks. There's a concept of this, essentially a virtual Zero Trust overlay that exists that can be applied into the operational space.
Right. Now, there is a concept that was really interesting, and I think, Mike, you mentioned it in our conversation, and it's micro-segmentation. So how is this used in Zero Trust?
Yeah, so kind of as we've already been chatting here a little bit about, looking into your network and understanding this idea of implicit trust. Think about this a little bit. When you set up a switching, switch infrastructure and those kind of things, by default things work. You define VLANs. And as you plug in your switches and you plug in interfaces, by default, it's designed to work and it's designed to communicate whoever is on that listening, network, subnet or whatever. The issue that brings into play is that, okay, so now I want to, you're talking about how do we reduce that footprint? How do we move to more explicit trust versus implicit, where just everything on that larger the subnet is allowed to talk? And that kind of comes into microsegmentation. I find this a lot of times when we talk about demilitarized zones, and I know we've discussed demilitarized zones at length in some other conversations we've had, some other roundtables. But really, the concept of demilitarized zone is to to have a separation between the IT and the OT environment. So once somebody comes through, maybe it's through a user to system type of an interaction, or it could be a system to system interaction, that there is some sort of a break in the communications, that there's not a direct path between IT OT environments. The issue that this comes into play, especially when we think about zero trust, if we create a DMZ that's flat. So what do I mean by that? I mean the DMZ, or you may have one subnet and you have all of your really critical services on that. So I may have a jump host, I may have a historian relay, I may have some edge device that's relaying, maybe translating different protocols and so forth. If all of those are on one flat network, that really allows an adversary to come through and to pivot on, to pick multiple targets to pivot upon to break down and come down into the OT environment. So by implementing, by chopping up your network, by creating smaller VLANs is one way to do microsegmentation. The problem, though, we see is that this adds a lot of complexity, and also, so now, where we were before, we were, re-architecting our network, to kind of overlay on the Purdue model or the 62443 models of zone and conduits and those kind of things on layers of trust. Now within those, we have multiple different, subnets and those kind of things where we have more firewall rules, more interfaces and so forth. But we are getting to that point, as we're describing here, is that we're really starting to look at the asset. What is that asset doing? Its purpose? How much is it trusted? And what devices is it talking to? And really breaking your network up in that way. There's other technologies coming out, and I think we may talk about them here in a little bit, that are allowing us to do this much, much easier, but that may be for further conversation. But nevertheless, that's one way of thinking about microsegmentation. And of course, you can even microsegment even further with private VLANs and other technologies to really get it down to where a device is only talking to another device over this very, very limited network environment.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. That's really interesting because, we start defining what zero trust is, and Tony mentioned that it's a strategy. And now we're talking about tactics. What are those tactics that are used to implement the strategy? And we start with microsegmentation. But now I'm curious to understand then how is the trust broken between users and devices in this environment? That's a question that I would like to ask to Daniel. What are those methods that are used to kind of enable trust between devices in a zero trust approach?
Thanks, Edgar, and thanks very much to our sponsors at Rockwell for having us all here today. What's not mentioned in my bio is my original cybersecurity career was actually in nuclear weapons systems. So I would argue pretty vocally that zero trust was a pillar without a name in that industry. It's already been mentioned that it's not technically feasible for all OT and IoT devices to kind of conform to zero trust, but it's really a trade-off back to those business decisions and business outcomes in terms of how much security you're willing or affording to introduce. And so much like a social contract, when we think about trust, in my opinion, zero trust in effect really looks like embedded vigilance. And that embedded vigilance is embedded into your policy. And this is a step we need to take across the board to automate more security and narrow the focus of analysts and security teams. And while it sounds really simple to implement, zero trust is actually very sophisticated. You wouldn't put locks on every single window and then set your door keypad to 0000, right? The password. And so, like others have mentioned here, operational technology environments are extremely purpose-built, and their security practices have to mirror that custom and unique nature. So really, it comes down to policies. Necessary policies and enforcement mechanisms based on devices and users will actually vary by every vertical, because every vertical has something that they consider to be more important, whether it's in oil and gas, electricity distribution, manufacturing, et cetera. And at Nozomi, we adopt a assume compromise mindset as well, in addition to zero trust approaches, which means that every user and device in the network is a potential access vector, which I think we've touched on a little bit before. And as a result, the mitigation of any threat requires explicit control of allowed users, devices, privileges, communication formats, and traffic flows. So you can introduce zero trust at each one of those steps and create stopgaps that don't, kind of manipulate your network in a way that makes it more difficult to run your operation, but in a way that actually introduces what I call redundant security controls without duplicative efforts. And that's kind of something I come back to when I, do some of the consulting and advising, which is things can be redundant without being duplicative. And that's got to be purpose built as well for all of your devices and your users and the way that you operate.
That's interesting. Now, Danielle, I'm curious to know what have taken us to here. Like, you probably have seen the evolution of the approaches used for cybersecurity. You probably have a lot of knowledge or kind of main cases of security breaches that are making cybersecurity evolve. So how has been that change in the past 10 years and how we got to here, to zero trust?
I really love this question. And I kind of joke with folks, like in my time in cybersecurity, we've really moved away from cyber risk as business risk, was kind of a quote everyone was saying 10 years ago, to everyone in your industry, everyone in your environment, everyone in your company is responsible for cybersecurity, to defense in depth strategies, right? Which I think we talked about on another panel, to adopting a zero trust mindset. And the focus has slowly but surely moved to the realization that we used to try to position detection over prevention. And I've called this out before, that that's a misnomer. So prevention reduces risk by addressing the opportunity for attackers to maybe access your organization and then the amount of damage that they can do with that access. And this mindset shift to zero trust over the last decade really acknowledges that no organization can prevent all access attempts, and they must limit the severity of viable threats and incidents, which is, again, something I think all of the panelists probably talk about every single day. And so every company now is realizing they have to first identify their individual internal and external vulnerabilities. They can't just take in swaths of data and intel and then, understand their network as it relates, or their company as it relates to all of that information. So this really kind of comes into visibility, and I won't go into, a sales pitch about that, but without visibility into the commands and communications, no organization can really fortify their assets. And so I think that it's really the zero trust approach is helping organizations to organize and introduce various tools and processes that then bolster their prevention efforts by, segmenting a network here or introducing detection tools somewhere else. Again, bolstering that threat intelligence, threat hunting, enumeration, all of those things. Also conducting training and tabletops and simulated exercises, essentially putting together a puzzle piece that, again, relates the world of threats and risks and vulnerabilities as we know them directly to the operation at hand, the critical functions, the crown jewels in an organization. And I think that's the gap that was missing for a long time, was even with defense in depth, a lot of the times people would do a risk assessment by technology or by network, and they wouldn't actually integrate their assessment between the ways in which functionally their organization actually operates, right? The touch points, the missing connections, the nodes, the personal devices, all of those things. And I think zero trust really brings to the forefront that there is a ton of interoperability and it's all relative. So I hope that answers your question with the evolution.
Yeah, it does. And thank you very much, Danielle, for that. Now let's come back a little bit to the deployment of zero trust itself, because we'll see a little bit of the tactics. Mike's mentioned the micro-segmentation. You, Danielle, help us to understand how the trust is exchanged between devices. But then how is this impact to the life cycle of the device? Like how the updates are done, how the operation is done of these devices. I guess something has to change. And Randy, I think you and I have a previous conversation about this, and you mentioned something about it. Can you please expand on that?
Well, one of the things I've noticed with a lot of the discussions is there's been a focus at the sort of the user authentication and a focus at the network control. But there's another level of security which is extremely useful for deploying zero trust systems, and it has to do with being able to authenticate devices and being able to authenticate applications. So it shouldn't, just because somebody has an operator has a username and password or a smart card that allows them to log in from an HMI panel that's connected to your process, they shouldn't be allowed to use those same credentials from their phone. And if you don't have mechanisms in place to prevent the misuse of valid credentials, then you have a potential security hole. And this is where it comes into the overall process and overall life cycle of the device, is that we're moving towards a world where the device will come in and it will have to be authenticated in some way, and then it gets plugged into your network, and then it's basically issued the credentials to allow it to communicate with your network, and then after that you then would start issuing or configuring user rights. And so nobody can talk to this device unless they're talking from a trusted application or a trusted device. And then they have to still provide the appropriate user credentials. And that gives you multiple layers of defense that you're not are not going to be, that are going to give you that much more level of protection. And we had a good illustration in the last couple of weeks where there was a bunch of exploit tools that were released by Dragos, and these were all focused on brute forcing the password and being able to take over and exploit devices because they were able to get a hold of these passwords. Well, a very simple solution would be to say, well, it's not enough to have the password. You also have to have an authenticated device connecting to you. And that's
Right.
and that's one model that's one part of the picture, this middle tier, which I thought was left out of the other discussions.
Well, thank you, Randy. Now, we have talked so far about the devices itself, and that's what I have here. I don't know if I missed something in your comments. What about the sensitive data? Is there a way to also protect or that sensitive data?
Well, the interesting thing about when you're going over the internet, the primary assumption is that everything has to be encrypted because who knows is picking it, who knows looking at it. But when you're inside a factory, the need for encryption goes way down. What you care more about is authentication. And in fact, in many times, putting on encryption on your network interferes with a lot of these tools that are available for monitoring and detecting anomalies. And those are a valuable part of your overall strategy. So you need, factory owners need to really think about whether or not the data actually needs to be encrypted in flight, and because they can get a zero trust system without encryption, as long as they're authenticating everyone.
Right. Perfect. Okay. So if I am an organization that is trying to implement this, this is just now to start kind of transitioning now to how this is implemented. What would you say are the primary stakeholders that have to be engaged in the deployment of a zero trust strategy? And that question goes to the audience. I don't know if Tony, Roman, if one of you wants to pick it up.
But I guess I'll start with, we talked about this being a strategy. We talked about this being kind of a holistic approach. And so this isn't necessarily a small team going off and doing their one section. It's kind of taking a step back and looking at your architecture, your philosophy as an organization, and the way you operate and deploy and leverage tools. And so I think it does take, it should be run at a corporate level or at a system level when you're doing systems engineering and systems design. Some of the concepts that came up over and over again is that zero trust is about being proactive in helping to reduce risk. And it's a big part of the systems engineering side of the house when you're kind of building and reevaluating what you have in place. And so I think it's got to be the front end. I think it's got to be front loaded, and I think you got to have corporate support from a variety of teams. And so depending on where you get started. So we talked about business outcomes. Maybe your first point of enforcement for zero trust is at the DMZ level. Like if you could just get zero trust at the DMZ, that might be a very reasonable start for where you are as a company from a maturity perspective. And then you want to start to isolate and identify different subzones and start to leverage microsegmentation. You can kind of gradually move into those spaces. And as you move into those spaces, you need buy-in from those teams. You need to make sure that you're buying devices, you're buying applications, you're buying products that or assets that allow you to be successful in your strategy long term. So I think that requires a great deal of collaboration and again, that holistic approach.
Now, from your experience, sorry, Roman, were you going to say something there?
Yeah, I was just going to add to agree with Tony. We've deployed zero trust systems in a number of customers already, and what comes through is the benefits of it, right? I mean, it's whether it's benefits to dealing with firewall management is way too complex. dealing with issuing laptops to suppliers and and dealing with their VPN connections and endpoint protection tools, way too complex. VLAN architectures are getting out of hand and too restrictive, and it takes re-architecture to get the assets to talk to each other when that's really needed. So there's benefits to really all different parts of the organization, the system engineering, certainly the security teams, even SCADA teams and operational teams, not to mention network engineering teams. So it's an approach that you could really get buy-in from multiple stakeholders, but it really takes just one simple use case to start with, whether it's just remote access. People are having trouble with the remote access, or I'm having trouble with, managing my firewalls, or I'm having trouble with, designing my VLANs. You could start at various parts of the in any given organization and start moving to zero trust.
Can I just jump in on something Roman said?
Sure, of course.
I just love that you said buy-in, right? Because a lot of times we work really hard to get buy-in. We think that the entire executive team or C-suite should definitely understand the utility and necessity of any security strategy. They typically hand off the implementation and enforcement of policy to the CISO, and then it kind of trickles down. What I see a lot of times as a big pitfall is that when we have buy-in, we typically articulate the situation, the task at hand, and the action we want to take in terms of security, but we never provide a result. So we'll introduce something for the company, we'll get all this buy-in, and then we'll never tell that broader group of stakeholders what happened because we took that action, right? We fall short in terms of providing the result. And so I love when people say, we really work hard to get buy-in, because we typically don't follow up on that buy-in. But over time, if you provide the result of the action you've taken because a task and situation that you've identified for an entire organization, you actually then bolster buy-in. You don't have to go get it every time because you've provided a result for an action you've taken. And so that's just something I wanted to point out when it comes to employees and compliance training and data. Sometimes a lot of people are involved in the action, and then nobody tells them, did we fall for all these things, or did it work, right? How is the DMZ looking? Did zero trust actually, does it function well? And so that's just something I wanted to pick up on when we talk about buy-in versus actually providing results to your organization and your C-suite.
And also, if I may add, don't forget the people who are actually using the device, your end user. It could be technicians, engineers, operations, those folks. A lot of times I see a lot of these security efforts and deployments. Again, you'll have, good leadership support. And it'll go down, it'll come into, hey, we need these devices, it'll get deployed. And then, the people who are actually affected by this, who are using this day in and day out, can't do their jobs or something like that. So just be mindful of and try to get the people, the people that are working at the plants, those automation engineers and those folks, get them on board with these initiatives as well, and get them on board early. When you're coming up with a new architecture design idea, talk to them about it. Will this work in this environment? Maybe we can get massively constrained architectures and, get an authentication out there, but will it work? And then what needs to change to make that work? So.
No, that's really interesting. Now, there's something that we have to keep in mind. Information is priority in IT networks. In OT networks, the priority is that things work, get to work. So how do you get the buy-in of people whose mind is if it works, don't touch it? How do you get there on board when it comes to zero trust for the OT, for the operation network?
And I guess I'll start since I brought it up, and I'm more than happy to listen to what other people's perception as well. But essentially, from my take, it's a lot of it's training and awareness. And what I have done, so again, I do a lot of architecture reviews and go into a lot of different facilities and so forth, and talk to folks on the plant floor, talking about their systems. And a lot of times it's showing them their systems, showing them how their systems work from a network and a visibility perspective. And then and then walking through how we're seeing, a lot of times. So, kind of going back to the, the pipe dream tool. Dragos didn't release a tool. Dragos identified a tool. Correct that one. But nevertheless, a lot of the things that we're seeing that are rapidly coming, what the adversaries are doing in the environment, a lot of folks at the plant floor, they're not tuned into a lot of the security news that we are. I mean, we live and breathe this stuff. The people at the plants, not necessarily. It's not their job. So, but we can be there and we can inform them. We can train them. We can, say that, your PLCs are now a focus for an attack. That wasn't the case a number of years ago. That is absolutely the case now. And so showing them their environment, talking about these attacks, talking about how adversaries are working, their TTPs, all those kind of things. I've had great results from those discussions, and it really kind of gets people focused in and going, my plant, I need to make some changes. Our environment's not as secure as it need to be, and I need to really, to protect our bottom line. So.
Oh, I would also mention to that. I mean, there's the security aspects are a big driver, but there are also some productivity aspects. I mean, today's operations are quite complex, in the fact that we've now, many people are remote. We're actively trying to get people out of these dangerous situations through more and more automation. Mm-hmm. We're utilizing more data, business intelligence systems, and remote applications for that. The operations is quite interconnected, and today's tools for managing that interconnectivity, things like firewalls, VPNs, VLANs, as I've mentioned, are really too complex and falling short. So what we're seeing people is struggle to manage them. It's not uncommon for somebody, for example, for an organization to take 6+ weeks to enable a remote contractor. I mean, by that time, you have a big problem in your operation, or it's downtime. You're losing money or creating quality issues. So what people do is, they just call that vendor and say, the vendor shows up with their cellular modem and just plugs it in, right, and just bypasses all of that security, and just to get things working again, right? So it's complex for today's teams to deal with the tools they have to enable productivity. The other thing we're seeing is self-inflicted wounds, right? So you have, as we call them, people coming in on site to service equipment. All passwords are set to be the same across everything. They don't even know what they're reaching out to most of the time. They change programs and configurations or the wrong assets, and that causes issues then that have to be unraveled and unwrapped later down the line, and you don't even know who did it. So there's clear productivity challenges that are today's architectures present, and that today's tools present, that Zero Trust can actually address those productivity challenges and make things much, much simpler. It's a common misconception that people think it's actually harder to administer Zero Trust. It's actually the other way around.
Well, yeah, I actually just sort of build on your comment there. I think the Zero Trust can only become reality is if there's vendors who offer software to manage it. Because if every individual factory owner has to become an expert on individually configuring every one of their nodes to make sure that it's secure, then either it's not going to get done, or it gets done poorly, and they end up having so many holes in it. It's just not worth doing. So there needs to be this holistic view. There needs to be this kind of the concept of some sort of centralized configuration that can manage these networks, and there needs to be standards which these things are built on. So factory owners are able to take advantage of different vendors depending on what their needs are.
What I used to describe that as actually, Randy, centralized management and distributed enforcement. So,
Yeah,
ability to really enforce that across, really any asset, any interaction at any location, but yet give the organizations the tool to manage it centrally.
exactly. And
Now,
and
go ahead. Sorry, Randy.
no, I was just agreeing with him. That's exactly what's needed for zero trust.
Yeah. Now, I remember in my times as an application engineer to have to deal with many devices that didn't even support connection to the Active Directory. So you have to manually set up the password, the username and password. There was no way to have that centralized kind of management. What is the situation now, based on your experience? Are we still far from having a kind of a standardized way for devices, for industrial devices to have connect to a centralized management system?
Edgar, I think that question is still yes, very much so, but though it'll probably take a couple more decades for that to be addressed. However, it's not something that can be overcome with a approach that can be overlaid, right? So the type of approach that, for example, we use is essentially creating an authentication proxy on top of these devices that have only device specific credentials, don't support managed type of credentials or accounts. And a proxy could be an effective way to move those devices to a managed type of an approach.
Now, is there any downside to that approach, to the centralized management for these devices?
I think a centralized approach is it requires actually gives you visibility into a number of various interactions and between users, machines, applications. The challenge then becomes, how do I utilize that information and turn it into policies, right? And that is a difficult challenge to address. However, it's possible to address through things like learning mechanisms, suggestions mechanisms, establishing baselines and things like that, and then affecting policies on top of that then affect zero trust across the whole operation. So it's a different type of a challenge, right? So which information data-driven systems are now good at addressing.
I think we have to be careful, like what we centralize and why. There's a difference between a centralized management for multiple integrated systems and a centralized console for managing one type of deployment of software or hardware. I've argued for weeks and weeks and weeks that we're probably going to see an increase of centralized control and management capabilities continue to be a single point of failure. So it also puts a target on those types of systems. And that's something we've seen in recent supply chain attacks. And so we just have to be careful when we talk about centralization, what we mean by that, right? A lot of our products have a central console for managing our product, but we're not trying to centralize the management of too much too soon without thinking through kind of the zero trust steps and that approach. So, but I actually think that this is really important because what we're really all kind of talking about is the fact that this awareness of increased interoperability and applications of zero trust strategies are kind of the answer to what we've for a long time called security by obscurity. And our industry has really, if there's a wake up call for anything, we've said that for many, many attacks. The real wake up call is that security through obscurity is no longer the reality, right? Threat actors are going to do their homework, and they have been. And that's what In Control or Pipe Dream has really revealed to us. And so zero trust is going to have its heyday because it's no longer obscure. And if the factory, operators don't need to understand every single part of the network, they do need to understand how they can be attacked and exploited. And I think that's what we're really kind of all dancing around, which is that awareness is here now. So what do we do about it? Mm-hmm. Introduce zero trust, pay for the right tools, have a good centralized, visibility of those tools, but don't centralize everything, right? Because then that just creates a single point of failure.
Well, when I talk about centralized, I'm talking more about the unified user experience as opposed to the actual storage. So distributing the actual enforcement of the credentials is essential to protect yourself against that. And I guess one comment I want to say about the idea of overlays, of authorization overlays, which are great if you're going into a brownfield environment, but I also think it's very important for factory owners to be looking towards the future, where they don't need to rely on these overlays, because every device itself can be individually secured, and that ultimately in the long term it was going to give you a better security posture than these interim solutions that allow you to basically get something working on the network you have as opposed to the network you wish you had.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I just want to address Danielle's comment a little bit as well. I think absolutely, centralizing control could be a point of failure. However, there's mechanisms also, I think that Randy also pointed out, that in a way that you can create a distributed control. You can have the centralized visualization, but the control itself is protected by a distributed architecture, right? So that eliminates a single point of failure across the entire system.
Right. I was kind of referencing SolarWinds or some of the companies that now are trying to authenticate devices and also push firmware updates from that central control, right? It kind of creeps. It's mission creep is really what I was talking about.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Sorry, Mike, were you going to say something?
No, just agreeing with that. Yeah, definitely. And I think in this conversation around what centralized is, that is there's a lot of iterations around that. What do you mean by centralized? Do you mean Active Directory? Do you mean your network management console that, a lot of times has elevated privileges to go out and do certain tasks to query or change values throughout your entire system? Or if we're talking about a centralized tool console to manage your security software. So there's a lot of things that we can centralize. And I think just when we talk about that, we have to be very careful on, we're using the right terms and that everybody understands, because like we just saw, we can all be talking about different kind of things, and we just need to have it level set. So
perfect. Thank you, Mike. Sorry, Roman. We are about to finish. We have 45 minutes already, and I want to make a last question, kind of to summarize the concept that we have been talking to. And I want to address one last question to Tony, and is if you want, I have to give an advice to the people trying to deploy zero trust approach, and those people are in the OT environment, what are those considerations that they have to tap to deploy it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I'd like to touch on. The first being, understanding the business impact of what you do. I think that's number one, because that really should help to set the priority of how you approach security. What you're really focused on, and so I think we've seen a number of use cases and examples where, whether it be Colonial Pipeline or others, or SolarWinds, it really helped them to understand and refocus on what is the critical service or good or capability that I provide to my customers or downstream people. And I think it's really important to make sure we understand that outcome, because that really needs to help us drive how we're going to maintain our resilience in continuing our mission. And so I think it's a good opportunity for people, to Mike's point earlier about creating awareness. Everyone should understand what that is and be unified in how we approach it. So I think that's step number one. Understand what your mission is and why it's important, what the impacts are, and that should help to generate buy-in. That should help to generate an explanation of why security is important. We've seen a number of security events that help to understand where security impacts availability of goods or whatever it might be, through ransomware or through targeted attacks. And I think, again, the next step from the device perspective is understand your outcome, understand what's core to being successful in achieving that outcome, and really start to look at how can I secure those assets and deploy a strategy to that. And over time, again, this is a journey, and I think it's really important for people to continue to think about those zero trust. Start from the outside in. Start to look at, start at start where you can and look at, new devices, new technologies, new capabilities. I know Randy's talked about devices that support authentication or user authentication. That's not a big portion of the market today. And so if we spend a lot of time focusing on that, it can take away from the bigger picture. And so it's important that we keep an eye to the future, understand where we want to go, and that we leverage those types of solutions where it makes the most sense, and not to give up if it doesn't solve all of our problems. So again, I'd say understand the outcome, understand the mission, start to go after those core pieces to maintain resilience, and start to apply where you can, and over time we'll get there. Right? I think that's the end of the day. At the end of the day, we'll get there with diligence.
Thank you, Tony. This is a very dense topic. I think Global Spec should probably make another panel about this, or probably extend it to more than 45 minutes. But really, we appreciate your comments. We didn't even get the chance to cover half of the information here, so there is plenty to talk. Now we are receiving questions from our audience, so we will select a few of them, kind of to answer it here now. And then we may have to leave other questions offline because there are many of them. So, Katie, back to you now.
Everyone, thank you all so much for that great discussion. As Edgar mentioned, we are going to move into the question and answer section. If you have a question for us today, please go ahead and enter it into the Q&A window and hit submit. We will get to as many questions as we can. If we do not have time for your question, don't worry. We will reach out to you following today's session. Edgar, I'm going to pass it back to you in the group to answer some of our attendees' questions.
Thank you, Katie. And we are back with some questions from our audience. We selected 5 questions for our panelists. So we'll start with the following question. And I think this one could go to Roman. It says, EY's Global Information Survey and Verizon's Data Breach Report contend that cyber attacks in the manufacturing industry occur more in 2020 and 2021 than past years. In some cases, the numbers are as high as 50% more than prior years, with data leakage as the common outcome of the attacks. How will Zero Trust help in decreasing the attack surface?
Yeah, thanks, Edgar. So Zero Trust is it's really a major benefit of Zero Trust is really reducing the attack surface to a great extent. I mean, today's attacks, they commonly happen through a remote connection, or a compromised connection that gets in and then spreads laterally across the entire operation. In fact, some studies have been done that this lateral spread can be achieved across the whole entire operation in mere 15 minutes. This is why today's operations are so worried when their IT systems get compromised. They quickly disconnect the entire operation. We've seen that happen in a high-profile recent attack. So Zero Trust limits that attack surface. It controls which assets, which users, and which assets can communicate or interact. So with that, you can now limit which assets can be accessible, which assets can interact with other assets, and shrink that attack surface to a great extent. Additionally, it also can be applied to data. So similar controls, authentication, authorization-based controls, and access policies can be applied to the data itself, right, on a very granular level. There are products such as ours that have created control for data, not just file-based data, but also streaming data down to a very granular level. So really controlling who can access that data, which applications, which users, and where.
Thank you very much, Roman. We have the next question that I believe goes to Randy because of the it talks about protocols. So what features should a secure IA communication protocol support?
Yeah, that's I think is important for any zero trust environment is you want to move away from the traditional protocols which don't have security at all and or do it as an oversight, and you look for something that has security integrated in it. And a couple things that you're going to want to see is the ability to authenticate every client that connects, every device that connects to you. Sort of two levels of access control. One, authenticating the device or the application. The next level, authenticating the user. And you're also going to want to look for a protocol that supports some sort of centralized identity model and token-based access control. Because this kind of infrastructure, if you have a protocol that supports it, it is a key enabling technology to allow you to build up a lot of the other sort of centralized management and that allows you to implement a zero trust environment.
Thank you, Randy. The next question is, digital transformation in the industrial control industry is providing capabilities for real-time monitoring of production cycles and performance while also addressing increased product demand. So I believe this question could go to Tony. And this is the question. How will Zero Trust support the operational benefits that businesses are realizing with digitalization efforts?
Yeah, I think when you talk about Zero Trust, again, holistically, it's looking at these interconnected systems. And when we talk about digital transformation, we're talking about accessing data or accessing systems that previously may have not been accessed to realize new outcomes or new capabilities. And so the old pneumatic systems or two-wire systems are now being put on IP networks. We're able to generate predictive controls or predictive measures. We're able to do a lot more things than we have in the past. And to enable all of that, it means that we've had to increase connectivity. We've had to introduce more software. We've had to introduce more smart devices. And every time we do that, and we introduce that technology, increases our potential attack surface. And so I think a big part of Zero Trust is how do we go about designing and implementing digital transformation with security in mind, leveraging concepts like Zero Trust to really ensure that the systems that need to talk are able to, and the ones that don't. And so when I think they go hand in hand, and it really talks about again, that systems engineering to kind of design resilience into these next generation architectures and capabilities that our customers are trying to realize. And I see they go hand in hand, and it really is an enabling force that allows them to realize what their intended outcomes are.
Perfect. Thank you, Tony. The next question, sorry, it's not the last. We still have a couple. It goes to Mike. How does Zero Trust help networks defenders such as SOC analysts that are constantly reviewing and responding to network traffic, improving their ability to manage the massive amounts of threats, alerts, and incidents?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually one that I have conversations with quite a lot around. Where is this going, and where is our networks going, and so forth. And I think kind of what Tony alluded to here a little bit as well, is that it's really around the idea of that, explicit trust. So a lot of our networks and the environments today are, the implicit trust. Things are just allowed to communicate within this trust boundary that we call OT. Well, in the current situation, there's a lot of, change can happen and things can begin to communicating. The other things, it's hard to know what's good. We can create baselines and so forth, but it's hard to know what's good for analysts, especially those who are not, don't have the context of what's going on in the factory. When we bring about Zero Trust, we're bringing about that idea of these devices can only talk to certain devices. And so when things do pop up, when anomalies do occur, we can be, this hardened and more lockdown environment is changing. And so we need to be, more apt to respond. I see a lot of times SOC analysts just get kind of bogged down by a lot of noise that some network products will generate, or just a lot of things that have been misconfigured. But with Zero Trust, we really see that locking down. Great technology to do this is actually software-defined networking, and I'm actually seeing this being deployed more and more in OT. And what you're doing there is you're really explicitly only allowing certain devices to talk to each other on the certain protocols. And with some of the software-defined implementations, you can easily now take that traffic. So it's not like you're losing visibility. You can still take that traffic and pipe it back into a some sort of a OT network security monitoring tool, such as Nozomi or Dragos or whoever you're going to use. So you can still use a lot of these excellent tools out there to get that visibility, but yet you're locking down, you're constraining your environment. So therefore, you're creating an environment where you have less alerts, less false positives, all those kind of things going on. So a huge help.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mike. And the last question is a very interesting one, and I think it's perfect for you, Danielle. It says, how can Zero Trust help fill gaps in laws, governance, and compliance?
So you're actually, Mike, I would underline everything he said that would also kind of apply to this question. As I mentioned before, we know that threat actors are doing their homework and learning more about the purpose-built nature of OT operations. And that means that unauthorized access is more dangerous than ever. And as we've kind of mentioned throughout the discussion, we've seen attacks that are focused on single points of failure. We've seen longer dwell times. The extra work goes into going undetected. And even the increased understanding of OT operations kind of is used to disguise the manipulations that we see as legitimate activity. And so Zero Trust is actually something that I see as an approach to reducing the severity of those incidents across the board. And it also is something that taps into the really strong safety culture that we see throughout ICS. And so I'm also really glad that Mike said baseline. So my answer to this question would be that technology security and industry writ large don't have good baselines. And to have a good baseline, you need real-time and overtime analysis. So the baselines today do really good real-time analysis. It's the overtime part that I think Zero Trust can provide to governance, insurance, compliance, et cetera. For a long time, there was very little concerted effort in terms of the data that you actually extracted and used, back to the results comment I made earlier, for the policies, procedures, and security tools that you introduced. So you couldn't actually tell historically, sector to sector or compliance regime to compliance regime, what progress or improvements had been made. So there's a lot of qualitative data that's been out there, but there's little quantitative data that's standardized across the board. And I think Zero Trust can really help with that. So for a long time, we were solving the wrong problems, I would say, establishing what definitions were for cyber war or legal parameters for targets and thresholds and things like that. But really, Zero Trust will help us with some of the bottom-up efficacy of hygiene training, year-over-year analysis, quality control, how we tune security products, all of those things that need to be measured and progressed. And on the baselines, I actually pulled up a presentation I have that I'm giving tomorrow. There are so many ways to introduce baselines, kind of like we talk about segmentation, we talk about network segmentation all the time. There's also credential segmentation. OTSDN is another great tool that was just mentioned. When it comes to baselines, we have AI that typically will baseline, learning in an environment or behavior anomalies. But there's also plausibility baselines for your real world outcomes, the physical operations that you see happening. There are security baselines for awareness, policy, maturity. There's also population analysis. So a lot of people will think about their supply chain as it relates to their operation, but they don't think of themselves as part of a supply chain for something else. So you're also, you have this population baseline in terms of your customers, your suppliers, what you supply, and the citizens maybe around your operation. All of those things really matter. And so if I had to give it one word, I think Mike really teed it up again to say that baselines will really matter for Zero Trust, and it'll continue to evolve. And it might even play a role in establishing better baselines to conduct reviews that vary, from industry to industry or vertical to vertical. I think there'll be something else, right? In the future, Zero Trust is an evolution. We'll create something else based on those really good baselines, and we'll get somewhere, that'll be progress and maturity in the future.
Thank you very much, Danielle. There are more questions, but we'll have to address them offline. Our time is over for today. So Danielle, Mike, Randy, Roman, and Tony, thank you very much for sharing your experience and knowledge with our audience. And to our audience, thank you very much for being here today. And we hope to see you again in our next panel discussion about security in the industry. We're also grateful to Roundtable for the hard work that they are doing on protecting infrastructure and industry from cyber attacks. And finally, for Global Spec, thank you to the millions of technical professional engineers who have allowed us to connect them to the parts and services they need for project success. And when that's said, Katie, back to you.
Thank you, Edgar. Now we just have a few items before we end things today. I would like to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists today and to Edgar for leading our discussion. And a special thank you to Rockwell Automation for sponsoring the Cybersecurity Industrial Systems Roundtable series. Today was the 4th session in our 4-part series, but please join us for all of the other sessions. You can visit our series page using the link listed in the resource widget. Sign up for all the sessions today. You won't want to miss it. And one last thank you to our audience members for being here with all of us today. You will be receiving an email from us with a link to the on-demand version of this presentation. You will be able to come back and watch us again or share it with colleagues. And please take a moment to fill out the survey that will pop on your screen at the end of this webinar. Your feedback is important to us. Again, thank you for taking time to attend this Global Spec Roundtable series. Take care, and we will speak with you soon.